When the police entered the apartment with their cadaver dogs, they were immediately overwhelmed by the unmistakable stench of decomposition. They pulled the dogs aside and traced the source of the odor themselves. It led them straight into the bedroom. Their eyes were drawn to the wardrobe. On the top shelf sat a black carry-on suitcase, seemingly untouched since the initial search. Underneath it lay a patterned fabric, and beside it stood a wooden plaque with the words "Thug Life." But it wasn't the plaque that caught the officers' attention. It was the reddish liquid slowly seeping from the corner of the suitcase, staining the fabric beneath it. Carefully, the officers lifted the suitcase down. As it shifted position, more liquid began to trickle down one side. They opened it. Inside, they found an oval-shaped package, meticulously wrapped in duct tape and aluminum foil. Next to it lay a light grey stuffed animal and a black garment. But the officers didn't need to unwrap the package to realize what they had just discovered. The suitcase was immediately closed again and transported, along with the bedsheet it had been resting on, directly to the forensic medicine unit in Gothenburg. What the police had feared most was about to become reality. Welcome to the Midnight Docket. I don't think I need to warn you about today's case being a disturbing one. You have probably already figured that out. However, it is a case that, despite a conviction, will likely leave you frustrated, maybe even furious, and probably with questions no one here will be able to answer. This video is quite extensive, so for your convenience, I've included timestamps for key parts. With that said, let's begin. This is the case of Wilma Andersson. Tishko began his day on Thursday, November 14th, 2019, like any other, working his morning shift in home care. His workplace was just a few minutes from his apartment, and he returned home shortly after 5 p.m. As he stepped through the door, he heard Wilma talking on the phone, but as soon as he shut the front door, she abruptly went silent and ended the call. It didn't take long before an argument erupted. That was how things often were between them. Fighting, making up, then fighting again. But this time, the argument became more intense. After a while, they calmed down, reconciled, and even decided to take a shower together. But soon, the tension flared up again. Tishko was frustrated. So was Wilma. He had reached his limit. Finally, he made a decision. It was over. He told her they should break up for good. As Wilma got ready to leave, he took her keys away from her. He didn't see it as a big deal. It was his apartment. She grabbed a few belongings, a bag, her phone, and some makeup before she left. As soon as the door shut behind her, he regretted it. He was still upset, but the thought of her walking out into the cold November night with nowhere to go gnawed at him. He threw on his shoes and headed out into the darkness, searching for her. But she was nowhere to be found. She had mentioned going to her sister's place, maybe even meeting up with some guy. Acting on impulse, he headed to the train station and boarded a train to Gothenburg. If she was really headed there, he thought he might be able to catch up with her. But when he got on the train, she wasn't there. He started to doubt whether she had even left Uddevalla at all. He didn't feel like traveling all the way to Gothenburg, so he got off at Ljungskile instead. That's when he realized there were train delays, and it would take time to get back home. Rather than waiting, he decided to walk back towards Uddevalla. At around 9:30 p.m., a police patrol spotted him. They stopped and asked why he was walking along the highway in the dark, without a jacket, dressed lightly despite the cold. He told them he was heading home, that he had missed his train, and that he just needed some time to clear his head. The officers didn't think it was a good idea for him to keep walking in the freezing night, so they drove him back home. When he stepped into his apartment, it was empty. Wilma was gone. The morning of Friday, November 15th, he woke up to a notification on his phone. He jumped out of bed thinking, maybe it's Wilma, but no, it was just a message from work. They were asking if he could cover a shift today. He declined, sank back into bed, and drifted off to sleep again. When he woke up, he felt drained and exhausted, so he stayed in bed longer than usual. The day dragged on. He spent most of it on the couch, playing video games, feeling restless. He checked his phone a few times, but Wilma didn't contact him. Saturday came, and he didn't do much that day either. He cleaned a little and tidied up the apartment, but mostly just tried to relax. He didn't even hear someone knocking at the door. If he had known it was Wilma's father, he might have opened it. But at that moment, he just wanted to be left alone. When Sunday arrived, something felt off. Wilma still hadn't reached out. She could be stubborn. They both could. But she had never gone this long without checking in. Suddenly, his phone started buzzing. Her mother, her father, her friends. Everyone was asking where Wilma was, if he had seen her. He didn't understand what they expected him to say. They had broken up. When the police called, he felt more annoyed than concerned. Why was everyone acting like this was his problem? She had left the apartment on her own. Still, he shared the missing person post about her on Snapchat, but didn't see why people were making such a big deal out of it. That evening, he got another visit. Wilma's mother, Linda, and her partner, Daniel, showed up at his apartment. Annoyed, he let them in. Linda looked around but found nothing. She asked him if he knew where Wilma was. He gave her the same answer he had given everyone else. She left. She asked to check the attic. He let her. He just wanted them all to stop blaming him. On Monday, he went to work. He still didn't feel great, but he needed to focus on something else. During his shift, he took the company car home several times to check if Wilma had come back. The apartment remained empty. After work, his cousins, Peshtuan and Lanko, called. They were in Uddevalla for some car repairs and wanted to hang out. They picked him up from his apartment, drove to McDonald's, ate, and then visited his parents' house for a while. While they were there, his father, Said, started questioning him. He demanded to know where Wilma was. Tishko sighed. How was he supposed to know? He was tired of everyone asking. Around 8 p.m., his cousins dropped him off back home. He felt exhausted and just wanted to rest. But not long after, someone knocked on his door again. It was Wilma's mother. Again. He was done. He couldn't deal with more accusatory looks, more questions. She told him she needed some of Wilma's clothes for the search dogs. Annoyed, he put on plastic gloves, gathered some clothes in a bag, and handed them over. He just wanted them all to leave him alone. The next morning, Tuesday, November 19th, Tishko went to work early, but left after a short while since he wasn't needed right away. He went back home and laid down on the couch, exhausted from the past few days. Then, suddenly, loud voices startled him awake. As he opened his eyes, he saw a shadow looming over him. Someone stood above him. His body froze. What the hell was happening? You are under arrest, suspected of the murder of Wilma Andersson. His heart pounded. He tried to say something, but no words came out. Murder? What did they mean? Wilma was missing, yes. But she wasn't dead. Why were they saying that? He felt their hands grab him, pulling him off the couch, locking handcuffs around his wrists, and escorting him out of the apartment. Everything happened so fast. He tried to make sense of it, but nothing made sense. What you just heard was Tishko Ahmed's version of events, a version he waited more than 6 months to reveal, only during his trial. But was it the truth? Where was Wilma? And what exactly had the police found inside that suitcase in the wardrobe? Although our story begins on Thursday, November 14th, 2019, Wilma Andersson's story truly starts long before that. We leave Ostetten, Austria, where we covered the case of Josef Fritzl, and instead go to Uddevalla, a coastal town in Sweden. In 2019, the town had around 36,000 residents, 2 of which were 23-year-old Tishko Ahmed Shabaz and 17-year-old Wilma Andersson. They lived together in a 2-bedroom apartment. They had met 2 years earlier when Wilma was 15 years old. Back then, Wilma was staying with her older sister, Emily. Tishko, however, was already 21 years old and already in a relationship with another woman. But it didn't take long before he ended that relationship and started one with Wilma instead. And because this was Wilma's first love, it was intense, unconditional, and overwhelming, and she was ecstatic. I know what you're thinking at this point. Surely their relationship couldn't be legal, right? After all, she was just a child and he was a grown man. The answer is yes, it was legal. Technically. In Sweden, the legal age of consent is 15 years old, which we frankly find questionable. But legal or not, Wilma was still far from being an adult. And now you're perhaps wondering, but what about her living situation? Why was she living with her sister instead of her parents? This one is harder to answer, but we will do our best. The exact reasons remain unclear, but what is known is that Wilma's parents, Linda Andersson and Marcus Carlson, were not together. For one reason or another, Wilma either wasn't allowed, didn't want, or simply couldn't live with either of them during her teenage years. According to her mother, Linda, it was for various reasons. Various reasons. That sounds extremely vague, and I couldn't agree with you more. But those are actually Linda's own words. Anyway, during her early childhood, Wilma lived with her father, but his home was far from her school and social life. More significantly, confidential records indicate that there were incidents that made living with him an unsuitable option. With neither parent providing a stable home, Wilma was forced to rely on others. Her older sister, Emily, stepped in when their mother, Linda, failed to take responsibility. Emily later described their mother as someone who pushed the parental role onto others, unwilling or unable to care for Wilma properly. By the time Linda had started a new family with another man and had 2 more children, Wilma was no longer welcome to live with her. For a teenage girl, the reality of being rejected by her own mother while she built a new life with new children must have been devastating. Emily later described Wilma and Linda's relationship as less of a mother-daughter bond and more like a friendship. Despite this, Wilma maintained some contact with both of her parents, and they occasionally sent her money for food and necessities, but she never really had a place to call home. Wilma didn't always live with Emily. At times, she stayed with friends, bouncing between homes. Then, after dating Tishko for a little over a year, they decided to move in together in a 2-bedroom apartment. She must have believed that she had finally found the security she had always longed for, a home of her own. But it wouldn't take long before that dream shattered. At 16 years old, Wilma was expected to cook, clean, and keep their apartment in order. Her tumultuous upbringing, combined with her new responsibilities, forced her to grow up quickly. The stress weighed heavily on her, and she lost motivation for school. Eventually, she dropped out after her first year of high school. At the very least, she had a steady relationship with Tishko to rely on. Or so she thought. As time passed, Tishko's behavior changed. He became increasingly controlling. Whenever they fought, he could kick her out of the apartment on a whim, telling her to come back when she knew her place. Each time, she was forced to beg friends or Emily for a place to stay, waiting until he allowed her to return home. Little by little, he shaped her into what he wanted her to be. He dictated what she could wear. He decided who she could see and talk to. In one message, he told her, "You cannot go out like that unless I'm with you." She had asked for permission to wear pink shorts to match a jacket he had bought her. He refused, saying, "I assume you understand that guys will stare at you like crazy. Those pink ones are so high up. They show half your ass. In my presence, it's okay. But if you think this will be a problem going forward, that I have too much say over what you wear when I'm not with you, then we need to talk about this now." Wilma, rather than resisting, apologized, swearing that she hadn't meant to disrespect him. She promised to dress as he wanted. "I'm sorry, I swear it won't happen again. I just wanted to match the jacket you got me." I don't dress like a hoe, and I'm not one. She was entirely dependent on him, not just emotionally, but in practical ways too. As the older one in the relationship, he controlled access to things she couldn't legally obtain herself, like alcohol and cigarettes, reinforcing her reliance on him and deepening his control. He was also the one who introduced her to marijuana and hashish, which she sometimes smoked with him. But it wasn't just about control, it was about ownership. In early 2019, Wilma messaged him with a simple statement, one she repeated several times. I want to obey you. But Wilma was not always passive. She had a strong will and could be jealous too. Their fights were frequent, passionate, and unpredictable. Sometimes his words were affectionate, showering her with declarations of love. Other times, his temper flared over the smallest things. One moment, he would write, "Papi loves you, baby girl." Wilma responded playfully, "Mommy loves you, baby boy." But just as quickly, his mood would turn. "What the fuck did you just say? Cut that shit out." Their relationship could be summed up in one single word: turbulent. Now that we have outlined Wilma's background, we can focus on the series of events that took place between November 14th and 19th, 2019, the days when everything changed. Wilma was now 17 years old, and Tishko 23. It was just after 5 p.m. on Thursday, November 14th, when Wilma told her mother, Wilma Andersson, that she had to hang up. Her boyfriend, Tishko Ahmed Shabaz, had just come home. She said goodbye and ended the call. She had made up her mind. She was finally ready to close this chapter of her life and start fresh. For the first time, it was Wilma who had decided to end the relationship, and this time she had no intention of going back. Meanwhile, in one of the apartments below Tishko's, a man named Peter Jacobson was resting after work when he was suddenly woken up by his terrified daughter. Dad, someone's screaming!" Peter got up while his daughter ran out onto the balcony. He asked her what she saw. "There's someone with long hair and they're fighting." The screaming continued, lasting between 5 and 10 minutes. Peter opened his apartment door to listen more closely, but saw another neighbor already making his way up the stairs. He decided to stay inside. The man making his way upstairs was Göran Svensson, another resident of the building. He had also heard the commotion and had had enough. For at least 30 minutes, he had listened to loud bangs, the sounds of objects being thrown, arguing, and shouting from both a man and a woman. The woman sounded frightened. And then, he heard a final scream, one much louder than all the previous ones. That was it. He decided to go upstairs and put a stop to it. While making his way up the stairwell, he was met with complete silence. They must have calmed down and worked things out, Göran thought. So he turned around and went back to his apartment. The building was now quiet, and shortly after 6:30, Tishko left the apartment. He walked to a nearby convenience store, bought a drink, and then headed to Uddevalla's train station, where he purchased a ticket to Gothenburg just before the train departed. Both purchases were made with Wilma's credit card. But only 15 minutes later, he changed his mind and got off the train in Ljungskile. What he did between 7:22 p.m. and 8:53 p.m. remains unknown. At some point during this time frame, several people spotted a young man near a small creek in the area. The man appeared to be in his early 20s, had dark hair and Middle Eastern features. No one knew what he was doing there, but something about his behavior seemed odd. One witness thought he was washing himself before he suddenly walked away and disappeared into the darkness. Just before 9 p.m., Tishko started walking north along the highway back toward Uddevalla. It didn't take long before concerned drivers started calling the police. They described him as dressed in dark clothing, lightly dressed for the weather, walking with his arms stretched out. Shortly after, a police patrol picked him up and drove him back home to Uddevalla. While all of this was happening, Malin, one of Wilma's closest friends, was trying to reach her, but with no success. Wilma and Malin had plans that night. They were supposed to go to a dentist appointment together and then have a sleepover at Malin's place. Wilma had already told Malin that she was planning to break up with Tishko. Malin also knew that Tishko had been acting strange recently. He had wanted to travel to the US to support Donald Trump, but had been denied entry because of a past trip to Iran, or at least that's what he claimed. After that, his behavior became even more bizarre. He had started talking about how Wilma was possessed by the devil, and that she was helping to destroy the world. On Friday, November 15th, Malin kept trying to contact Wilma, but still got no response. Even more concerning, Wilma had gone completely silent on social media, something that was highly unusual for her. Wilma was always quick to reply. Now, she wasn't answering at all. Since Wilma was still a minor, the dentist's office had reached out to Wilma's father, Marcus, to let him know that Wilma had missed her appointment. Marcus immediately tried calling his daughter, but she never answered. By this point, several of Wilma's other friends were also trying to reach her, all without success. A growing sense of unease began to spread among her loved ones. Later, it would be discovered that Wilma's phone was manually turned off for the last time at approximately 2 p.m. that very day. That same evening, a neighbor heard slow, heavy footsteps in the stairwell. It was unusual. Something felt off. It sounded like someone wearing heavy shoes stomping up the stairs. Curious, the neighbor opened the door to look outside, but saw no one. However, the automatic hallway lights had been activated near the entrance, and a moment later, they heard a door close further down the stairwell. At around the same time, a car, more specifically, a blue Ford, was seen parked near the back entrance of the building. Or at least the witness thought it was blue, but it could never be confirmed. At the time, it didn't seem significant, but soon, these small details would be a source of speculation and different theories. By Saturday morning, November 16th, Wilma's father, Marcus, was growing increasingly uneasy. The last time they had spoken was Thursday, when they had discussed her upcoming driving lessons. Now, she wasn't returning his calls. Adding to his concern, her dentist's office had contacted him, informing him that she hadn't shown up for her appointment. Wilma had always been punctual, and for her to miss it without notice was highly unusual. Even stranger, neither Wilma nor Tishko were answering their phones. Feeling something was off, Marcus drove to their apartment to check on her. He knocked, no response. He called through the mail slot, still nothing. The entire apartment was silent. Peering through the slot, Marcus scanned the dimly lit space. Inside, the bedroom door was slightly ajar, and on the floor, he spotted a single black men's shoe with a white sole next to what appeared to be a bag or another shoe. His eyes drifted toward the shoe rack, and there they were. Wilma's black sneakers and half-high boots, neatly placed on the top shelf. That's when he noticed something even stranger. The electric heater in the bedroom was on, despite no sign of anyone being home. The floor bore traces of dried mud, as if someone had walked in with dirty shoes. Clothes lay scattered from the hallway to the bathroom, carelessly strewn about. Nothing about this felt right. Still, Marcus had no way of getting inside. Hoping for answers, he left and drove to Tishko's parents' house. This too led nowhere. He knocked repeatedly, but no one answered. The driveway was empty, though there was a garage where a car could have been parked. Turning to a neighbor, Marcus confirmed that this was indeed the correct address. Still, the house remained silent. By now, Wilma's friends and family were growing deeply worried. Despite their concerns, no one officially reported her missing that day. By Sunday morning, Marcus couldn't ignore his gut feeling any longer. He returned to the apartment, determined to check again. When he looked inside through the slot again, something had changed. The dried mud was gone. The scattered clothes had disappeared. The apartment now appeared clean, but someone had clearly been inside. This was the moment Marcus had had enough. At 12:45 p.m., he drove straight to the Uddevalla police station and officially reported Wilma missing. At the same time, Wilma's friend Alba and her mother, Ingrid, who had been like a second mother to Wilma, contacted Wilma's mother, Linda Andersson, to inform her of the situation. Shortly after Marcus filed the missing person report, police called Tishko twice. The first call lasted only 2 minutes. The officer explained they were calling because Wilma's father was concerned. Tishko's response was brief, cold, and detached. He confirmed that he and Wilma had broken up on Thursday and claimed to have no idea where she was. When asked if he had contacted her since, he firmly denied it. He showed no concern, no urgency. He didn't even ask any questions about Wilma's disappearance. The second call, an hour later, took a different approach. This time, police brought up an earlier incident where Wilma had allegedly tried to hang herself in the attic after a fight, and how Tishko had been the one to stop her. Police suggested that maybe Wilma had done something similar again. At first, Tishko hesitated. Then, reluctantly, he agreed to check the attic, though he insisted she wouldn't be there. After a few minutes, he simply stated to the operator, "She's not here." Again, his indifference stood out. When police told him that Wilma's phone had been off for days and that none of her friends had seen her, he shrugged it off. He casually suggested she was probably with another guy. At 5 p.m., Wilma's mother, Linda Andersson, and her partner, Daniel, arrived at the apartment. Linda knocked, and this time, Tishko opened the door. Stepping inside, she immediately felt uneasy. Tishko stood before her, wrapped in a blanket, his movements slow and groggy, almost as if he were high. Linda's eyes scanned the room. On the kitchen table, she spotted torn pieces of paper with dried reddish stains. When she asked about it, Tishko brushed it off as lipstick, but to her it looked like blood. Everything about this visit felt wrong. She asked if he knew where Wilma was. His response was short and dismissive. "I don't know anything." Her eyes wandered. Then she noticed something. Wilma's keys were still there. Wilma never left without her keys. Linda asked why Wilma would have willingly left them behind. "I took them from her," Tishko said flatly. "I was tired of everything." A wave of dread swept over her. Wilma's coat was still in the closet. Her winter boots were still on the shoe rack. Her makeup remained in the wardrobe. Her toothbrush sat untouched in the bathroom. Nothing suggested that Wilma had ever left the apartment. Tishko seemed detached, barely paying attention, often checking his phone. It was as if he were waiting for someone else to arrive. Linda needed to get out. Before leaving, she insisted on checking the attic. This time, his hesitation was visible. Still, he agreed, but he refused to let her check the attic herself. As they left, he followed them out, watching. Then, almost as if on cue, one of his friends arrived. Casually, the friend mentioned that a security guard had seen Wilma at a store. Linda's gut screamed at her. This was too convenient. The way it was said, the timing, it felt staged. As she left the building, her worry had transformed into certainty. Something was very, very wrong. On Monday, November 18th, while friends and family searched frantically for Wilma, Tishko Ahmed Shabaz was scheduled to work from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. However, during his shift, he used his work vehicle on 5 separate occasions to return to his home address, where he spent a total of 72 minutes, something that had never occurred before. The purpose of these visits remains unclear. Another notable event on this day was the visit from Tishko's cousins, Peshtiwan Baban and Robin Lanko Kurdo. The two travelled from their home in Alingsås to Uddevalla, a journey of approximately 90 kilometers one way, totaling 180 kilometers for the round trip. According to Peshtiwan, the primary reason for their trip was to take Lanko's silver Audi to Tishko's father, Shabaz Sayed, for repairs. While in Uddevalla, they also decided to visit Tishko. Although visiting a cousin may not seem unusual, it is worth noting that the three rarely communicated. In fact, nearly a year had passed since Peshtiwan and Tishko had last spoken. The timing and circumstances of their visit raise questions. The cousins departed Alingsås around 2 p.m., coinciding with the end of Tishko's work shift. Upon arriving in Uddevalla, they left their Audi at Shabaz Sayed's workplace for servicing. Instead of using their own vehicle, they borrowed Tishko's father's red Ford to get around. Once in possession of the Ford, they claimed to have picked up Tishko without entering his home and then went to McDonald's for a meal. Afterward, they visited Tishko's parents' home, where two of his brothers were also present. During their visit, Tishko's father was reportedly very angry and questioned his son about Wilma's whereabouts. By approximately 8 p.m., the cousins said they had driven Tishko back to his apartment before returning to Alingsås using the red Ford. The Audi remained in Uddevalla for repairs and was picked up the following day, November 19th. A discrepancy arose during police interviews regarding which vehicle they had used at different times. Peshtiwan stated they had switched from the Audi to the Ford immediately upon arriving at Shabaz Sayed's workplace, meaning they would have used the Ford while at McDonald's. However, Lanko recalled the sequence differently, claiming they had still been driving the Audi during their McDonald's visit and only swapped vehicles after their stop at Tishko's parents' house. Additionally, discrepancies between their reported times and Tishko's mobile location data further complicated their account. After the cousins dropped Tishko off at his apartment, he received a visit from Wilma's mother, Linda, who was accompanied by Wilma's uncle, Simon. They had come to retrieve Wilma's clothing to assist with the search efforts. Upon arriving at the apartment, they rang the doorbell, but no one answered. After waiting for some time, Linda bent down and called through the mail slot, urging Tishko to open the door and explaining that they needed Wilma's clothes in case she was hiding somewhere and search dogs were needed. Eventually, he opened the door. As soon as he did, Linda noticed that he appeared agitated and restless, exhibiting signs of being under the influence of something. He was irritable and impatient, complaining that Linda was constantly showing up at his home. In the background, the television was on. Linda requested that he retrieve Wilma's clothing without touching it directly, emphasizing the need for uncontaminated scent samples for the search dogs. Tishko responded by shutting the door in their faces, leaving Linda and Simon standing in the stairwell. When he reopened the door, he handed over a paper bag containing clothes. Holding up his hands, he pointed out that he was now wearing disposable gloves, stating that they were sterile and provided by his workplace in home care services. Linda asked whether the clothes had been washed or if they were unwashed and recently worn, as the latter would be more effective for tracking. Tishko replied that it was a mix of both. After briefly closing the door again, he returned with additional clothing, including a pair of Wilma's used underwear. Interestingly enough, as Linda took the bag, Tishko requested updates on the search efforts, stating that he and his father wanted to be informed about any developments. Linda responded briefly before leaving. Later that evening, Wilma's friend Alba and Alba's mother, Ingrid, were participating in a search effort led by a volunteer organization. They were searching a hill near Tishko's apartment when they happened to glance through his window. To their surprise, they saw Tishko inside, and he appeared startled upon noticing them. His reaction was immediate. He froze, then quickly moved to conceal himself while peering out discreetly. Shortly after, he picked up his phone and seemed to make a call, looking increasingly stressed. Feeling deeply unsettled by what they had witnessed, Alba and Ingrid decided to discontinue their search for the night and left the area. On Tuesday, November 19th, Tishko was asleep on the couch when he was suddenly awakened by police officers surrounding him. At approximately 10 a.m., he was arrested. Shortly afterward, the investigation into his apartment and other accessible premises began. As authorities examined the electricity usage in the apartment, they quickly noticed periodic spikes between November 14th and November 19th. One notable increase occurred shortly after Tishko was dropped off by his cousins on the evening of November 18th and continued into the early morning hours of November 19th, just hours before his arrest. In the following weeks, every possible location that Tishko had access to was meticulously examined. Near the creek where witnesses had seen a young man on the evening of November 14th, a jacket was found. Although it could not be directly linked to Tishko, Its discovery raised strong suspicions given his presence in the area and the fact that he had been without a jacket when the police patrol found him walking along the highway. In a waste disposal room next to his apartment building, several significant discoveries were made during the collection of household garbage. 3 bags containing blood-stained materials, primarily pillow stuffing, were recovered. The materials bore traces of Wilma Andersson's blood and tissue remnants, as well as blood from Tishko Ahmed. At 2 separate occasions, specially trained cadaver dogs were brought in through Europol to assist with securing evidence. During the investigation, one of the dogs marked the bed, an indication that would soon prove highly significant.
Jag tar den.
So. Ready? Hey, klar, zu rechts.
Wenn du willst, darfst du gerne die Schranktüren auch aufmachen, da droben schon. Ja, da kan vi få något även bara garderobsdörren.
Unten. Wieder. Unten. Nochmal hierher. Unten. Und hey, komm her hier. Lass ihn. Okay. Komm her. Pause. Pause. Komm her jetzt. Vincent.
A blood pattern analysis confirmed investigators' worst fears. Large amounts of blood spatter were found throughout the apartment, on walls, floors, furniture, countertops, and the sinks. Evidence suggested that a body had been in the living room, dragged across the floor, placed on the bed, and finally moved to the bathroom. Further forensic examination revealed cut and impact marks on the plastic flooring in the bathroom, indicating the use of a sharp tool. However, the most disturbing discovery was made when police discovered the suitcase in the wardrobe on November 28th. It was immediately sent to the forensic medicine unit in Gothenburg for further examination. Upon arrival, forensic technicians began examining the suitcase and its contents. Their initial focus was on the carefully wrapped package, which was tightly encased in aluminum foil and tape. The package was meticulously sealed, and when carefully opened, it revealed a severed human head in an advanced state of decomposition. Long strands of brown-blonde hair remained, though they loosened at the slightest touch. A wound near the left eyebrow was visible, but it was the injury in the center of the forehead that stood out, a deep, sharp-edged gash exposing skull bone beneath. Surrounding it were multiple fine, linear cuts, along with bluish-black bruising just below the skin. Reddish staining around the nasal openings hinted at internal trauma, while a metal brace in the lower jaw provided an immediate avenue for identification. DNA analysis and forensic dental records confirmed what investigators already feared. This was Wilma, or at least a part of her. But one final detail erased any doubt about who was responsible. Tishko's fingerprints were found on both the aluminum foil and the tape that encased the remains. Tishko's decision to keep Wilma's head while disposing of the rest of her body is one of the most disturbing and perplexing aspects of this case. But was this violence truly random? In one message, he told Wilma, "I just want to lock you in my basement and whip you with a rope every day. Then fuck you in the ass, dry, no lube, nothing." And Wilma, who had been molded into his idea of a perfect girlfriend, didn't resist. Instead, she replied, "Then you better kidnap me, baby. I just want to satisfy you until you come." In another message, he wrote, "I just want to tear you into 4 pieces and fuck all of them separately. Twice a day, each one separate." Were these messages early warning signs of what he ultimately did? The forensic investigation inside the apartment provided a clearer picture of what likely happened to Wilma Andersson. Blood traces in the living room indicated that she had either sustained severe injuries there, or both been injured and ultimately died in that room. However, there was no marking from the cadaver dogs in the living room, suggesting that she had not remained deceased there for more than 15 to 20 minutes. The time required for the scent of decomposition to be detected by the dogs. At some point, Wilma had been moved from the living room to the bedroom, either by her own effort or with assistance. She had been placed on the bed, lying atop the bedspread. It remains uncertain whether she was still alive at that point, but given that the cadaver dogs strongly reacted to the bed, it is likely that she was deceased at some point while lying there. Interestingly, the amount of blood found on the bed was relatively small. This could be because she was not actively bleeding at that stage, or because she had been wrapped in a material that soaked up the blood or hindered it from getting onto the bed. What the police quickly noticed in the bathroom was that the shower curtain appeared brand new, with even the creases from its packaging still visible. This reinforced the theory that Wilma had been wrapped in something while lying on the bed. Inside the bathroom, investigators discovered damage to the plastic flooring, which was determined to be relatively recent and likely caused by a sharp object. These findings, combined with blue star reactions in the hallway leading to the bathroom, indicated that Wilma had bled in that location. However, no traces of blood were found in or around the shower drain, leading investigators to believe that a significant amount of water had been used to clean the area. While the apartment had been cleaned, blood residue remained on the floors, furniture, walls, and along the baseboards. DNA analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Wilma Andersson. Additionally, some areas contained mixed DNA profiles, identifying both Wilma's and Tishko's genetic material. In the kitchen, a vacuum cleaner was found with a brand new vacuum bag inside. While it could not be definitively proven that the vacuum had been used to clean up evidence of the crime, the fact that the bag had been recently replaced raised suspicions. Especially since Wilma, on the same day she disappeared, had written to Tishko that the vacuum cleaner was broken. And if the vacuum cleaner was broken, how was the apartment cleaned? Admittedly, a broom and mop can handle most things, but that doesn't explain why the vacuum cleaner now in the apartment seemed to work and had different vacuum bags with different dimensions and color than those found in the apartment's cleaning cupboard. Had Wilma, who took care of all the cleaning in the apartment, been mistaken about the vacuum cleaner? Or was there more to this than what meets the eye? The Blue Star forensic test revealed a rectangular imprint in the living room that did not match any known objects in the apartment. This suggested that an item had been removed from the scene before police arrived, which further makes one wonder if another vacuum cleaner had previously been in the apartment. Blood pattern analysis strongly indicated that Wilma had been subjected to repeated, forceful blunt trauma in the living room, particularly in the area between the armchair and the television. Blood spatter on the window wall near the balcony door suggested that a bloodied object had been swung against the wall at least 3 times. Blood found on the lower front edge of the armchair and footrest implied that a body part or an object covered in Wilma's blood had been struck at least once while in a low position near the floor in front of the chair. The flow pattern of the blood indicated that the footrest was extended at the time. Blood on furniture, the television screen, and the floor near the TV wall suggested that Wilma had been attacked in front of the television, with the violence occurring at a height no greater than the top of the screen. 2 significant bloodstains containing tissue fragments on the right side of the display cabinet and the adjacent wall indicated that Wilma had been subjected to exceptionally forceful violence, so intense that pieces of tissue had detached from her body and were flung onto surfaces in the room. To summarize, forensic evidence concluded that Wilma Andersson had been subjected to extreme, repeated blunt force trauma in the living room. At some point, Wilma had been moved, explaining the presence of blood traces in the hallway and near the bathroom. Her bloodied hair had been in contact with these surfaces. While the exact sequence of events could not be definitively established through blood pattern analysis, it was clear that she had suffered an extremely violent attack and that attempts had been made to clean up the evidence. Furthermore, forensic investigators discovered Tishko's footprints in the blood, solidifying his involvement in the crime. Despite having arrested a potential perpetrator and uncovering much of what had transpired in the apartment, many unanswered questions remained. Had Tishko acted alone, or had he received assistance? What could possibly have motivated such an unfathomable and brutal crime? And most distressingly, where was the rest of Wilma's body? The police had already arrested the primary suspect, Tishko, who would eventually stand trial for Wilma's murder. However, he was not the only person under scrutiny. On November 24th, Tishko's father, Shabaz, was informed that he was under investigation for protecting a criminal, as he was suspected of assisting in the removal of evidence. During interrogations, it was revealed that the family owned 3 cars, 2 Ford models, a Ford Focus and a Ford Cougar, and an Audi, which Shabaz claimed was being used by a relative in Gothenburg. Additionally, on the same weekend that Wilma was murdered, Shabaz had borrowed a friend's Audi, which he used on Sunday. Suspicions against Shabaz arose when police found blood, a false nail, and a long hair strand in the Ford Cougar. A portion of the blood was later confirmed to belong to Wilma. However, this was dismissed as insignificant due to the small quantity and the fact that Wilma had been in the car many times. Similarly, the false nail and hair strand could have been left behind during previous rides. However, investigators also discovered a gasoline canister with some remaining fuel inside the car. Shabaz claimed it was for his lawnmower and that he kept it in the vehicle to avoid fire hazards in the house. When asked if storing it in the car wasn't also a fire risk, he had no satisfactory response. Tishko's stepmother, Shahonam, was also suspected of desecrating a body and protecting a criminal. However, the evidence against the parents was ultimately not strong enough to press charges, and they were released, though suspicions remained. As for Tishko's cousins, Peshituan and Lanko, they were never formally considered suspects. They were only questioned as witnesses. Ultimately, the only person charged with Wilma's murder was Tishko. During the trial, he presented the same version of events that was described earlier in the beginning of the video. When confronted with forensic evidence, he blamed technical malfunctions and suggested that unknown individuals must have broken into the apartment after his arrest and planted evidence, such as Wilma's head and blood traces. The court, however, did not find this defense credible. On July 17, 2020, Uddevalla District Court delivered its verdict. Tishko Ahmed Shabaz was sentenced to life in prison for murder. The court ruled that it was beyond reasonable doubt that Tishko had killed Wilma Andersson in their shared apartment on November 14, 2019. The fact that he had kept her head in a suitcase indicated not only his guilt, but also his attempt to cover up the crime. The court deemed the murder particularly ruthless and brutal, justifying the maximum penalty of life imprisonment. As the verdict was read, Tishko remained motionless, showing no visible reaction. Meanwhile, Wilma's family broke down in tears. While the verdict offered some measure of justice, it could never compensate for the loss of their daughter and sister. Additionally, most of Wilma's body remained missing. However, the family's ordeal was not yet over. Tishko chose to appeal the verdict to the Court of Appeal. He continued to maintain his innocence, claiming that he had been convicted without sufficient evidence. His defense attorney argued that alternative explanations for the blood evidence existed and that it could not be conclusively determined how or where Wilma had died. The prosecution, however, stood firm in its assertion that the evidence was overwhelming and that a life sentence was the only appropriate punishment. The appeal proceedings largely mirrored those of the district court trial. Witnesses were questioned again, forensic evidence was presented, and experts, including forensic pathologists and crime scene investigators, testified about their findings. After deliberations, the Court of Appeal reached its decision. While it still found Tishko Ahmed Shabaz guilty of Wilma Andersson's murder, it concluded that the evidence did not support a life sentence. The court argued that the exact cause of Wilma's death could not be determined, nor could the precise motive behind the murder. Since the cause of death remained unclear, the court could not definitively conclude that the murder had been exceptionally cruel or involved extraordinary brutality, criteria necessary for imposing a life sentence. The court acknowledged that Tishko's act of hiding Wilma's head in such a gruesome manner was an aggravating factor. However, this alone was not sufficient to justify the harshest punishment. As a result, in October 2020, the Court of Appeal reduced the sentence to 18 years in prison. Tishko Ahmed Shabaz was subsequently placed in a correctional facility to serve his sentence. Despite the guilty verdict, many unanswered questions remained, most significantly, the whereabouts of the rest of Wilma's body. This lingering mystery made the case even more painful and unresolved for her grieving family. The Court of Appeal's decision to lower the sentence meant that Tishko could be eligible for parole in 2031, 12 years and 1 day after Wilma's murder. By then, he would be 35 years old. If he were to serve his full sentence, he would be released in 2037 at the age of 41. While the trial against Tishko was being prepared, conducted, and concluded, the search for the rest of Wilma's body continued. Family, friends, volunteer organizations, and police combed through all conceivable locations, both on land and at sea. Some traces were found, but as of today, in 2025, nothing of Wilma, besides the head, has been recovered. The search is no longer a priority for either the police or search organizations. The only ones still looking are her family, friends, and a handful of individuals who refuse to give up. Those who want to bring closure and peace to both Wilma and her loved ones. Among the traces that were actually discovered, there was a pair of burned glasses and fragments of clothing resembling what Wilma was wearing at the time of her disappearance. It has never been officially confirmed whether these items belong to her, but it is difficult to ignore the connection to the gasoline canister found in Shabaz's car. Wilma's mother has repeatedly pleaded with Tishko to reveal the location of her daughter's remains, but he has never provided any information. It would be unfair if I didn't take a moment to clarify something about Wilma's parents. It's easy to criticize Wilma's parents for their parenting, but we must remember that we don't have all the facts. Moreover, both Linda and Marcus took action when they became concerned for their daughter and never gave up searching for her. Had they not reported Wilma missing and been persistent in their efforts, we might not have any answers at all today. With that being said, I guess you're wondering about Tishko. What is he up to these days? As of writing this script, Tishko is serving his sentence at Hall Prison in Södertälje, one of Sweden's largest high-security facilities. With a security rating of Class 1, the prison is designed to prevent both escapes and external rescue attempts. Tishko's time behind bars has been far from uneventful. Before being transferred to Hall, he was reportedly severely assaulted. The details of this attack remain unclear, but it suggests that his presence in the prison system has not gone unnoticed. During his time at Hall, he has received multiple warnings for threatening behavior. In one instance, he allegedly referred to a female correctional officer as a whore. In another case, he was reported to have shouted aggressively and appeared threatening towards staff when he was denied access to a DVD player. One of the most concerning incidents involved a direct threat toward a female officer. According to reports, he told her, "If I get a warning, you won't have a good time at work." In another case, he allegedly warned staff, "If I get a warning and my leave is revoked, things won't go well for you." Even though the case is considered closed, many unanswered questions remain. To this day, people continue to speculate about what truly happened, where the rest of Wilma's body is, why Tishko saved her head, and who else may have been involved. The theories are too many to cover in full detail, ranging from ideas involving vacuum cleaners, organized crime, and even Wilma's own family. However, since there is no substantial evidence supporting those claims, we will focus on the most plausible theories based on the facts available. While we may never know the true reason for why Tishko decided to keep Wilma's head, several possibilities emerge when examining the psychology of such an act. One theory is that keeping Wilma's head was a way for Tishko to maintain control over her, even in death. Throughout their relationship, he displayed controlling tendencies, dictating how she dressed, who she spoke to, and where she could go. If he viewed Wilma as his possession, keeping her head could have been a grotesque extension of that control. By preserving this part of her, he may have been clinging to the idea that she still belonged to him in some twisted way. Some killers who retain body parts do so not as trophies, but out of an inability to let go. If Tishko saw Wilma as someone he deeply cared about, despite their volatile relationship, he may have kept her head as a way to keep her with him. This would align with cases where perpetrators exhibit remorse, but still commit horrific acts due to emotional instability or possessiveness. In some cases, killers separate body parts due to a psychological fixation. The head is the most identifiable part of a person. It holds their face, their expressions, their identity. If Tishko had any obsessive or ritualistic tendencies, he may have fixated on the head as the most important part of Wilma. This could also explain why he went through the effort of wrapping it so meticulously in tape and foil, almost as if preserving it had a deeper meaning. Another explanation is that keeping the head wasn't sentimental or symbolic, but purely practical. The rest of Wilma's body could have been too difficult to dispose of all at once, so he prioritized getting rid of it first. He might have planned to eventually get rid of the head too, but was either interrupted or didn't have the means to do so before he was arrested. Alternatively, the head may have been kept because it was the easiest part to hide, small enough to be stored in a suitcase, unlike the rest of her remains. He may have believed that by disposing of the body separately, it would be harder for police to prove a murder without a full set of remains. Since the forensic examination of Wilma's head revealed multiple injuries, including blunt force trauma to the forehead, it's possible that Tishko kept it because he feared that disposing of it with the rest of the body could provide too many clues. If the rest of her body bore wounds that could directly implicate him, such as stab wounds, bruises, or other signs of struggle, he might have thought that without it, the police would struggle to determine how she died. Some murderers act methodically, while others are impulsive and chaotic. If Tishko killed Wilma in a moment of rage rather than through a premeditated plan, he may have been acting in panic afterward. Keeping the head may not have been intentional at first. he may have simply not figured out what to do with it before being arrested. Regardless of his motivation, the act of keeping Wilma's head while discarding the rest of her body points to a deeply unsettling mindset. Whether it was about control, obsession, fear, or panic, the decision reflects the horrifying brutality of the crime. One of the most debated aspects of the case is whether Tishko could have acted alone. Disposing of nearly an entire body, cleaning up the crime scene, and continuing his daily routine, all while Wilma's family kept showing up, seems like a daunting task for just one person. The logistics alone raise serious questions. Where did the tools for dismemberment come from? Where did they go? And most importantly, could someone else have helped him cover up the crime? Suspicion turned toward those closest to him when police found traces of Wilma's blood inside his father's car. Alongside the blood, investigators also discovered a false fingernail and a long strand of hair resembling Wilma's. Even more concerning, a gasoline canister was found in the vehicle. Although his father insisted it was for his lawnmower, the timing and presence of other suspicious evidence in the car led to speculation that it may have been used to transport or dispose of Wilma's remains. Given his work as a mechanic, some have theorized that he may have had access to scrapyards where evidence, possibly even Wilma's remains, could have been disposed of without raising suspicion. Then, there were the cousins. On November 18th, 4 days after Wilma disappeared, Peshtiwan Baban and Robin Lanko-Kurdo made a seemingly random trip from Alingsås to Uddevalla, allegedly to get Lanko's car repaired by Tishko's father. While there, they picked up Tishko, had dinner at McDonald's, and visited his parents' home. On the surface, their visit seemed routine, but inconsistencies in their statements raised suspicion. When questioned separately, the cousins couldn't agree on simple details, like which vehicle they had used that day. Peshtiwan claimed they immediately switched from Lanko's Audi to the Ford Kuga, the same car that later tested positive for Wilma's blood. Lanko, however, said they drove the Audi to McDonald's before swapping cars later. The conflicting timelines, coupled with vague explanations, led some to wonder whether their visit had a hidden purpose, perhaps helping Tishko dispose of evidence before his arrest the following morning. Even more suspiciously, their visit occurred just hours before police raided Tishko's apartment. Did they know what was coming? Had they been warned? Was this a last-minute effort to remove something from the crime scene? The timing feels more than coincidental, and while there is no direct evidence proving they assisted in covering up the crime, their actions have never been fully explained. Of course, there's another possibility, one that suggests no outside help was needed. Some theorists believe that Tishko disposed of Wilma's body gradually, using his job in home care as a cover. Since he traveled between different residences for work, he could have discreetly placed small portions of remains into household trash bins, knowing that the contents would later be incinerated at a waste facility. If true, this would explain why no further remains were ever found. The case of Wilma Andersson is haunting, not only because of its brutality, but because of the lingering questions that remain unanswered. Where is Wilma? Despite extensive search efforts, legal proceedings, and public interest, her body has never been recovered. The man convicted of her murder, Tishko Ahmed Shabaz, has never revealed its location. He has never confessed. Instead, he has clung to his version of events, claiming he doesn't know what happened, insisting on his innocence. Yet the evidence is undeniable. His footprints in the blood, his fingerprints on the tape wrapped around Wilma's head, the inconsistencies in his statements, the blood found in his father's car. And still, something is missing. Perhaps that's why this case continues to captivate and disturb so many. We crave a complete picture. We want to know the full truth. We want Wilma to be found. And so, the case remains incomplete. The truth, like Wilma's body, remains hidden, and the only one who knows refuses to speak. Despite this being a deep and extensive dive into Wilma's case, there is still a wealth of information, details, and theories that I haven't included. With that said, it's time for me to sign off. Thank you for your time. I hope you found this episode interesting. and I hope I'll see you next time on the docket.